My name is Runqi, and I come from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I'm very glad to share my research topic today in this conference. My research title is From Chinese Poetic Imagery to Cultural Night Tourism, an Aesthetic Exploration of the Nights. This is the content of my study. In recent years, night tourism has emerged as a unique medium for showing local culture and aesthetics. In Chinese cultural tradition, the night occupies a special place in classical poetry, often serving as a stage for emotional expression and philosophical reflection. Meanwhile, there is a growing trend that cultural night tourism in China is being aestheticized by users who want to share their night travel experience on the social media. However, only a few studies have examined how traditional poetic imagery is recontextualized within contemporary social media. So, this research seeks to explore the problem that how are literary imaginaries of the nights in classical Chinese poetry represented and transformed in modern social media portrayals of cultural night tourism. This is the three significance of this study. As we know, night is a bleeding ground for imagination and aesthetic experience. While many scholars have explored how the night is imagined from a Western perspective, there is still very limited research on how ancient culture interprets or understands the night. In fact, the scholar have proposed that the night in ancient traditions is often imagined quite differently from how it's portrayed in the West. So, in East Asian traditions, especially in Chinese culture, people usually treasure or advocate the aesthetic way of life. It's a way of observing and responding to the world with aesthetic awareness. That means the aesthetic of way of life emphasize that life is not only to live, but also to live beautifully. So in the Chinese context, practice or behaviors like writing poetry or sharing quoting the poetries when sharing their night tourism experience, drinking tea, strolling through the gardens have long been part of this ecstatic way of life. So this study is built up upon the concept of aesthetic. Aesthetic refers to the perfection of sensory awareness, which is fully realized in the perception of beauty. One's aesthetic evaluation often arises when the individual projects their emotions onto the external objects or the environments. So the red note for the research methodology, the red note, also known as Xiao, which is a UGC platform in China, served as the main data source of this study. In the red notes, people can share their life experience and often learn from others sharing through it, something like TikTok or the Instagram. So it provides a rich user-generated database for the tourism research. Here is the data collection and research design process. Firstly, the keyword like the night tourism plus poetry are used to search on red notes, and initially there are 597 results generated. Then after removing the duplication and irrelevant contents, there are only 85 posts left for data analysis. And next, semantic analysis and narrative analysis were used to identify the recurring themes, explore the transformation process of aesthetic expression of the cultural night tourism. Now let's see what what result has come out. There are 5 main top-level themes generated from the contents, reviewing how Chinese poetic imagery is reinterpreted within the cultural night tourism narrative. Firstly, aesthetic objects is the first thing generated from the analysis. It mainly consists of symbolic motifs that carry cultural meaning. On the survey, there are only a physical objects or settings like the bridge or the window or the moon, but at a deeper level, they evoke the cultural symbolism, philosophical ideas, or emotional resonance shaped by literary and aesthetic traditions all over the years. For example, a window like this picture in the right side, a window is not only a functional tool anymore, but also carries important symbolic meaning. As you can see from this picture, when people who understand the Chinese culture, they see the carved lattice window, they always associate the scene that a woman in ancient time stand and weeping sadly behind the window because she is missing her husband who is gone to war. So they may consider this motif is so beautiful from the aesthetic perspective or assessments. So the same as table 1, table 2 shows the symbolic imagery that's related to the nights. So now here it comes to the second theme, the subjective aesthetic experience. Together with the aesthetic objects that we talked before, they make up the initial aesthetic materials together. There are 3 dimensions including in tourist aesthetic experience. The first one is ritualized behavior. It's the symbolic, performative, or situational actions of tourists that give special meaning to the night and experience. Through this ritualized behavior, tourists develop an embodied interaction with the night, like the everyday festival rituals in the nightscape, and also the spatial transition behavior like walking, boating, or the role-playing performance, something like this. All of this is ritual-like behaviors. And next is affective attunements. It refers to the process that the tourist emotion states become synchronized with the external context. For example, the text 46 expressed her feeling through the moonlight. She said as, and I wait for a cloud to pass by to whisper my feeling to the moon. This is a synchronized state with the night atmospheres. So the third dimension of the aesthetic expression is meaning making. It's the process of tourists constructing their personal meaning in response to the night's aesthetic stimulates during the night tourism. So people generate philosophical reflection, evoke their association and imagination, construct their self-identity within the aesthetic night context. After tourists immersing themselves in the nightscape, they complete the assembling process of the initial aesthetic materials. Then they transform their natural experience into the poetic language in order to share it through the social media. This is the coding process of the aesthetic material. So there are 4 sub-themes comprised in poetic narration. The most distinctive one is intimate narrative. It's often expressed through the second-person perspective and provides a sense of closeness between narrators and readers, often constructing an imagined communicative space of only you and me. within the text. By adopting this strategy, the night is transformed into a space of intimacy, suggestion, and lyricism. Second, rather than guide the reader through a fully articulate theme, the nocturnal narrative usually withdraws from explanation, allowing the meaning to emerge and generate through the silent space between words. For example, the text 7 describes that it feels like step into another dreaming world when he or she is conducting the night chaplain. This means this narration evokes imagination from the readers. What kind of world is being entered? We don't know, we never know, and it's left for the readers to imagine. And third, gaze-oriented narration refers to the transformation of nocturnal experience into visualized, image-rich expression through narrative structure that can emphasize framing, perspective, and gaze, rather than simply describe what is seen. This mode of narration structures the gaze, framing the world through apertures, angles, or the boundaries, like observing the nightscape from the window. Lastly, poetic language and rhetorical style is the literary techniques and stylized language that the narrative employ to construct the aesthetic and atmosphere of the night. So, if poetic narration reviewed the coding process of initial aesthetic material, then spatial recontextualization shows how tourists situate those treasure experience into space with collective memory and cultural meaning. It refers to the narrative practice of linking present night experience to the pre-existing cultural or historical coordinates. And it's realized through classical intertextualized and spatial reenchantments. The first one means the deliberate citation, adaptation, or revoicing of Chinese poetic lines, and the spatial reenchantment refers to the aesthetic transformation of ordinary space, endowing them with renewed emotion and cultural meaning. For example, the text 5 said, "When the noise of the day fades, moonlight lays a veil of gauze over the Changlang pavilion." In this narration, the darkness is function as a filter, reshape the way space is looked at by the tourist and the reader of this expression. Finally, this poetic narrative represents the poetic aesthetic space of cultural night tourism. This is an imagined and emotional charged space field constructed through the interplay between the poetic narration and spatial recontextualization through the nighttime tourism narratives. This space is also a liminal space, which is a state between reality and illusion, and also between the dream and wakefulness. It's carried the characteristic like blended reality, dreamlike ambiguity, layered temporality, and poetic sense of place. Within this space, a place gains its poetic ambience because the nights provide a context of defunctionalization and re-centralization. It removes the place. It means this space removes the place from everyday function and allowed people to feel it anew emotionally. Meanwhile, poetic language transformed the physical space into a container of aesthetic experience and cultural identity. Therefore, the poetic sense of place not only represents the local beauty of the night, but also completes an aesthetic transformation from landscape to poetic realm, from space to cultural meaning. So here we come to the conclusion parts. This figure shows the conceptual framework of the study. It reflects the representing process of the poetic aesthetic night space. To be specific, as we discussed before, the imagery of the aesthetic objects and experience of the tourist interacts and integrates together, assembling the initial aesthetic materials. Then, poetic narration is adopted to organize and express the experience, which is the coding process. In the third stage, which is the anchoring stage, people link their aesthetic experience of the night to poetic memory so as to recontextualize the aesthetic night space and arouse emotional resonance. This is the process of the anchoring. Lastly, this process constructs and represents a liminal space called poetic aesthetic night space. So this is all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's exciting to be able to participate and present in the conference. I'm Holly. I'm coming to you from Australia, and I'm located in the central west of New South Wales, which is, if you know Australia, it's sort of right in the middle of the eastern coast of Australia. And what I'm looking at is the role of night sky tourism in inland regional development. And sort of as we heard earlier, the way in which nightlife policy then sort of becomes cultural policy. What I'm looking at is the way in which night sky tourism starts to become regional development policy. And part of what underpins this commodification of skies in inland Australia is that if you're not familiar with Australia, it's a very big continent, and most people live right around the edges of the continent in cities. So it's a very urbanized country. So what night sky tourism tries to do is entice people from cities, from the edge of the country, into inland Australia, where supposedly there's open and unpolluted skies. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm zooming to you from the land of the Wiradjuri peoples, whose sovereignty was never ceded, and I pay respects to elders past, present, and always. And what you can see there is an image of a proposed night skies experience concept plan for our country and outback New South Wales, so for inland New South Wales. And state tourism promotes central New South Wales as, quote, one of the best regions for night skies, with less cloud and light pollution than coastal and city destinations. It's also home to a variety of places to stay that are out of town with low light pollution, end quote. And so what I'm looking at with this research is to analyse the planning imaginaries and that are promoted through planning documents and news media, and looking at Indigenous scholarship to contextualise the economic imperative for sky tourism. And I also want to think about the longer historical practice of settler colonisation and the construction of environmental assets as empty and open for exploitation. So there's this kind of positioning of skies as air nullius, as just open and waiting for commodification, which obscures and disavows First Nations and Indigenous relationships to the sky. This also forms part of my work on regional development and infrastructure, which I call seeing like a settler. So I'm interested in not just the settler colonial logics that underpin the way that environmental assets in regional places are positioned and commodified, but also how the process of development itself is also a function of settler colonization because it works to reinforce and normalize settler relationships to the environment. So why sky tourism? Part of this comes about because of the ways in which neoliberal economic policies have meant that there's uneven development within regions in Australia. And a lot of regional development planning and policy has been devolved onto local areas themselves. So rather than being supported by the federal government or the state government, there's a kind of situation where you have uneven development, and it's really up to places and local areas to do what they can with whatever assets they can to try to improve the local economy and to improve livability in the area. So one element of this is sky tourism, the idea that the skies and in regional and less urbanized areas, less polluted skies are an untapped asset for local areas and regional governments to tap into and to promote and try to get people from the coast to come and visit inland areas. So as I mentioned before, there is a kind of settler colonial underpinning here in the way in which environmental assets are viewed as closed or undeveloped until they are opened up and commodified and developed when non-Indigenous peoples pay attention to these environmental assets. And what this does is to, as I said, it works to disavow First Nations relationships to country and First Nations relationships to the sky. So I'm just going to skip here too. And there's also post-COVID, there was also an economic situation where people were leaving city areas to go into regional areas due to cost of living issues where rent and housing is viewed as more affordable in regional and inland areas. So there's also this real push from local governments to try to capture the kind of mobility of populations at the moment and to try to get them to come inland. And sorry, I forgot to show this image when I was talking before. The kind of settler colonial relationship between infrastructure planning and development opening up these supposedly Indigenous and undeveloped spaces. So what you're looking at here is an image called Manifest Destiny, and it's an image from North America, and what it shows is a figure moving across the picture, and she's bringing infrastructure. So she's bringing a telegraph wire, she's bringing trains, and what you can see is that she's bringing light into places that are dark. And so what you have with night sky tourism is a kind of reverse of this image where darkness and dark skies are viewed as valuable. So I might just skip over. And what you have in some of the planning imaginaries around night skies is the notion of skies and the night as being really kind of passive backdrops for people to enjoy. So in the previous presentation, Runqi was talking about the way in which people kind of embody these relationships with the night sky through semiotics and architecture and poetry. And in these kinds of planning documents, it's really the idea that you'll kind of go, you'll sit under the stars and you'll enjoy the aesthetic experience of a night sky that's free from, supposedly free from pollution. So these planning imaginaries are trying to capture a rise in also astrophotography as well, which is supposedly creating a booming tourist industry for isolated regional towns. And so some of the news stories around sky tourism talk about the fact that in the outback, so inland Australia, people often refer to it as the outback or country. There's always spare accommodation and spare amenities, but people are not always using them. So night sky or dark sky tourism is a solution to some of these problems and the unevenness of inland tourism. So I mentioned before, there's a couple of concept plans for night sky tourism. And so there's another night sky sky tourism plan from another town in New South Wales called Narromine, which is also trying to develop its skies through an aviation hub and develop gliding and aviation related tourism through a proposed sky park. Narrabri, which is another town in Central West, develops a plan which quote, encourages people to explore the unlimited possibilities of country and outback New South Wales and the mesmerising stars that stretch across the evening sky. So another report on Australia's regional strengths by Infrastructure Australia says that, quote, regional Australia's wealth of open landscape and dark skies presents a significant opportunity to expand the presence of emerging astrotourism offerings. And this tourism approach involves scientific and recreational activities which focus on the study and appreciation of stars in the night sky. And a lot of the regional development plans want to get onto a dark skies. They want to be recognised officially as dark sky parks. And to be recognised as a dark sky park, you have to have developed a set of principles and flexible cost-neutral land use planning measures to reduce pollution from dust and artificial and natural light, which can obscure the true night sky, appearing as an orange haze. So this part of the planning is interesting in the attempts to present an unpolluted sky that's free of what's called an orange haze. So the reason that this is a problem is because you might have known that quite a few years ago there was quite severe bushfires in Australia, which created significant amount of sky pollution. So this is a photograph that was taken during the day in a regional town from my brother. This was during the bushfire season. And these are some photos. This is a photo I took in my backyard. You can see there's a dust cloud that eventually just covered the whole sky, made it orange. This was during the day as well. And this is a news report that talks about these massive dust storms. Why are there these massive dust storms? It's because of the 100 plus years or so of monocultural farming, which has created salinisation and aridity in inland Australia. There's been severe droughts in inland Australia. And so we quite frequently get these weather events that create an orange haze, which is what the concept plan that I mentioned before, to be recognised as a dark sky park, means that you have to have these strategies in place to eliminate light pollution and to eliminate dust and orange haze. But with climate change and with these weathering conditions, it's questionable. It's questionable whether it is sustainable or feasible to guarantee to tourists that if you come inland, you'll you'll have like this wonderful sky that's represented here, or you might have something that looks like this. There's no way to control that without governments making a really strong commitment to climate change. So I also sort of talk here as well that while the sky is sort of presented as this discrete entity that can be managed as though it's separate from the land, the landscape, the dust, and whatever is circulating on the ground is very much caught up with and has a relationship to what is happening in the sky. And I'll just finish off too by talking about the point that I made earlier, which is that while some of the concept development plans mention First Nations in terms of there being the capacity for a unique cultural experience that may include First Nations heritage, there really isn't a sense in the documents or even in the news reporting about the extensive relationships that First Nations and Indigenous communities have with the skies and have with the stars, and First Nations philosophies and knowledges which are premised on the relationship between the land and the sky and the relationship between the environment and the stars. And so I guess that point I made about the way in which the sky is trying to be managed as this like discrete entity that's separate from what's happening on the ground. When you look at Indigenous scholarship and you look at Indigenous understandings of the sky, it's never separated from the ground. It's never separated from what's happening in terms of the weather. It's never separate from what's happening in terms of a changing climate. And it's also not clear, I guess, from these planning documents and planning imaginaries how First Nations relationships with the sky and with the night sky and with the stars will be protected as well. And First Nations in Australia and elsewhere have also commented on this in relation to climate change, that pollution and bushfires and dust obscure their capacity to continue knowledge and to continue culture. So if they don't have a clear view of the sky, if they don't have a clear view of the stars, that's also a disruption of First Nations knowledges and First Nations cultures. So I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. Should I wrap up there?
Actually, you are sharp on time. You have a few minutes left, but you could start thinking on wrap up.
I guess I might just wrap up really quickly and say that the present focus on dark sky tourism and night sky tourism is far from stable because of climate change and because of what's happening on the ground, and that this investment in skies could be abandoned in favour of another environmental asset. And so I guess the problem here is that the disarticulation of the night sky from the ground, from weather patterns and climate change and other factors which cause light pollution means that you have these kinds of regional planning ideas that don't necessarily provide, I guess, sustainability or stability for regional areas, but neither do they provide sustainability or stability for the environment or the skies of these areas. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.